Hey everybody, it's March 10th. Today we're looking at the American Zenith. The word zenith there, according to Google, says it's when something, the time period when something is the most powerful or the most successful. Well, we'll see about that as we click through this. Alright, it's the 1950s, as last we left. We kind of already talked a little bit about electronics and inventions, and so here we have 1947, the invention of the transistor. That was actually December 23rd of 1947. It sticks in my head because December 23rd, a very awesome, brilliant history teacher was born on December 23rd. Also, it's Festivus. So if you don't know the history of the holiday Festivus, the aluminum pole, the feats of strength, the airing of grievances about your family, you need to look that up. I'm sure you can find it. Anyway, December 23rd of 1947. Now, I was born in 70. I wasn't born that way. But 1947, so a transistor was created. So a transistor, like transistor radio. Do you go back that far? Transistor is when you have three couplings, and one of them controls the current in the other two. Yeah. Okay, go ask Mr. Midget. So, but once we had the transistor, and they started figuring that and swapping them out with the diodes and all that crazy stuff, then computers, and we got this company called IBM, and they're going to start to make some computers and crazy stuff like that. Aerospace industries, planes are getting bigger, planes are getting faster, planes are going to start transporting more and more people from the left coast to the right coast, from the east coast to the west coast, from the blue coast to the blue coast, I guess. And then 1956 we have a ton. It says the number of white collar workers are going to supersede the number of blue collar. Remember from last week, blue collar means that you work in a factory, you get your hands dirty, you work outside, you go a white collar is a clerical work, generally inside, sitting at a desk, sitting in an office, teaching math. White collar versus blue collar. And white collar is going to exceed the blue collar starting at that point. So we have more people in the service industry than we do in the manufacturing. Oh, there's some advertisements. I was going to say advertisements. Advertisements for TWA, Trans World Airlines. He's not wearing a seatbelt. He'll get in trouble for that. Only 7 hours to brush up on your French. 7 hours to France? Yeah, I guess it's about. Well, count the time zone, I guess. This next one, magic carpet, 32,000 miles long. Wait, what? 32,000. Magic carpet is 32,000 miles long. I've got a problem with that. 32,000 miles is the circumference at the equator of the Earth is 29,901 miles. That says 32,000. That's bigger than theirs. I need to write to this company 60 years ago, 70 years ago. Betty Friedman. Before we do that, let's see. The white-collar jobs that are going to open up, the clerical jobs, the jobs in the office buildings, we're going to have lots of women move into those jobs. Which means a whole bunch of women are now not going to be being full-time homemakers, full-time mommies. And that's going to cause a little bit of rift here with some people. So we have Betty Friedman, who's going to write a book in 1963. I think it was 1959. So let's see. So she went to Smith College, it was an all-women's college. And then on her 15th anniversary, no, what do you call that? 15th reunion. 15th year reunion, she showed up in 1959 and was talking with all of her colleagues, all of her cohort, and she basically was polling them and saying, "So, how you doing?" And a whole bunch of them said, "Being a housewife, I'm just not. I mean, I got a college degree from Smith College, and now I'm doing nothing, just being a housewife." And so Betty Friedman decided she's going to write a book about this. She called it The Feminine Mystique. The feminine mystique can be defined as the idea that women should always be at home and they should, rear their children and should cook food and I was about to go and do women's stuff, but that would be incredibly misogynistic, which would be ironically what the book is about. And so Betty says, Miss Freeman says, no, we need to get past this. And so she writes this book in 1963, and it becomes a blockbuster, over 1 million copies sold, and whew, now people are talking about it. Should women stay at the house? Should they only raise kids? Should they only cook dinners? Or can they actually, go be people? Turns out they can. Who knew? I'm joking. A couple of quotes here. The one on the far right says, men weren't really the enemy. They were fellow victims suffering from an outmoded masculine mystique that made them feel unnecessarily inadequate when there were no bears to kill. So the masculine mystique is that we're all like, Neanderthal, and we like to, go out and hit stuff, sports ball kind of stuff, And apparently there's no more bears to kill, so we don't know what to do. That's the masculine mystique, according to Betty Friedman. We like to go out, guys like to go out and hit stuff. Probably. And she says, and now we have the situation that we don't have bears anymore, so what are guys going to do? What do we do? Now we just play video games and hit stuff in video games. The key to the trap is, I'm reading the middle one, the key to the trap is, of course, education. Okay, I like this already. The feminine mystique has made higher education for women seem suspect, unnecessary, and even dangerous. Oh, no, I'm not going to get myself in trouble. But I think that education, and only education, has saved and can continue to save American women from the greater dangers of the feminine mystique. Right. Let women be educated. Let them go to school. Let them, look at that. The smarter you are, the better options you have. Who'd have thought? And then we go to Elvis Presley. In the 50s, so we had a lot of innovations. It says credit cards, fast food. When was McDonald's? Was that 50, 54, 56, 57? No, somewhere was it in the 40s? No, it was in the 50s, wasn't it? And new forms of recreation highlighted the emergency. Somebody looked that up. When was McDonald's founded? His name is Ray Kroc. That was the guy who founded it. In 1946, there were only 6 TV stations. 6 TV stations in 1946. Oof. And then 10 years later, in 56, there were 146. That's a lot of sixes there. 146. So they added 140 television stations within 10 years. And I know you're like, so I've got like 1,000 on my TV right now. Yeah, I know. But, back then, in the 70s, when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, our TVs had Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 9, Channel 13, Channel 25, Channel 34, Channel 43. We had 7. Ooh. Televangelist, and there's Billy Graham. He's a Baptist preacher, and he's going to get on the TV. And we've talked about evangelicals before in this class. We've talked about obviously with the Great Awakening, and then the Second Great Awakening, and sinners in the hands of an angry God. And now the televangelists are saying, hey, that's great that we can get out there in the tents and we can have the revivals and we can do all this stuff and talk to crowds of hundreds and maybe even 1,000 or so, but you get on TV, and so there's Billy Graham, and he's doing his thing. As population moved west, sports teams moved west, popular music was transformed in the 1950s. Let's see, in the 1950s, obviously you had Elvis. And it says right there, Elvis Presley created a new style known as rock and roll. And he created, Buddy Holly, Chubby Checker, the Big Bopper. You can argue. Certainly, Elvis Presley brought it to a lot of the people. My next door neighbor, when I was growing up, we'd go into the house, and she had all these paintings of Elvis all in the living room, and they were done on velvet. So, Velvises, is that right? Velvet. There's a name for it, but anyway, see, big fan of Elvis. And he got in trouble because he liked to swing his hips. I'm doing this, but it's below the camera screen, so you can't see it. Traditionalists were critical of Presley and many of the socialist movements. Yeah, okay. Eisenhower. So the Democrats were going to push Truman again, but people are starting to sour on Truman, and so they're going to push Adlai Stevenson. And then the Republicans are going to push for Dwight Eisenhower to become president. And they're going to go, and you can see the map, and it's a whole bunch of red. It's a whole bunch of red for the Republicans. So Eisenhower crushes Stevenson and becomes our next president. Now, Eisenhower, his vice president candidate was Richard Nixon. We're going to be spending some time with Richard Nixon later. So vice president candidate Richard Nixon, as the election was getting closer, like within 6 weeks of the election, some people started they were coming out and they were saying, "Hey, Nixon, you've got some splaining to do," and with regard to finances, that you may be taking stuff from the pot that you're not allowed to take. And so he decided he was going to clear the air, and he went to California, and for $75,000, he got 30 minutes of airtime on the television set, and he basically just looked right at the camera, and he said, "All right, here's what I'm accused of, but here's how it is. Here's what my finances look like." And he basically pulled out his checkbook, and he said, "Here's how much we pay for electricity. Here's how much we pay for the house. Here's how much we pay for the food. Here's how much, and here's how much we have in the checking account." And so it was one of the very first times that somebody that high in office, or about to be in office, used the television to basically do something like that. We call it the checkers speech because after he got done listing all the different things, he did say, and this is actually kind of notorious here, he did say towards the end, he said, "Look, have we received gifts? Yes, we have received gifts. In fact, one of the gifts was that his wife, Pat Nixon, had mentioned that the little girls didn't have a dog, and so this dog owner down in Texas decided to give them a Cocker Spaniel, a little black and white Cocker Spaniel, and so the little, was a 3-year-old girl, little bitty Nixon girl, and she named the dog Checkers. And so Vice President candidate President Nixon on the air goes, "Yeah, we're not giving that dog back. If it's determined that it was illegal for us to be getting that gift, we're not giving the dog back because, it's Checkers." So this has now become the Checkers speech. And today, if somebody says, "Do you need? You may need to go give a Checkers speech," what that means is that you need to go on TV and basically explain what's going on. So I was about to say President Biden, as of today, has not given any speeches as president, but President Trump gave several, I don't know if you'd call them checker speeches, though. Yeah, we'll get to it later. Eisenhower won by a huge majority. You see all the red. Eisenhower was the president when the Korean War ended, and in fact, he actually said, "Do you want us to go over there and drop a bomb? Because we can drop a bomb." And then the armistice was signed, and we talked about that last week. 2 weeks ago? Because spring break, it's weird. All right, Eisenhower's leadership style. All right, so let's talk about Eisenhower for a second. He's number 34. So he is I don't think this all is here. He's the only 5-star general. Well, I guess George Washington, if you count him, because he was the leader of the. But Eisenhower was the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces of Europe. I mean, he was the big dog, not just the big dog, but the big dog over there in World War II in Europe. And then MacArthur was the guy over there in Japan. Eisenhower's main goal in office was to stop the Soviet Union. See, we're still talking about that. And reduce federal deficits. Deficits means that you're paying more than you're getting in taxes. And then you add those years up, and then you get the debt. Okay. That's economics, and that'll be next year. He supported local militia groups, military coup, learn to read. He supported local military coups against governments in Iran and Guatemala and Egypt and Israel. So we'll talk about those as we get there. After Sputnik and the space race, we'll get there. The Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Interstate Highway System, and National Defense Education Act. All right, so those are all different slides. We'll get there. Here we go. Okay, so the title of the PowerPoint was the American Zenith, which means, again, at the top, the most powerful, the most successful. Well, the next 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 slides, not so much. So we're talking about desegregation. So to talk about desegregation, which means integrating the races, we have to talk about segregation, right? And so here we go. If we talk about the South, we still have the Jim Crow laws. Remember, Jim Crow laws are laws specifically targeted against the African American society. So just go and go. We've talked about that ad infinitum at this point, or ad nauseum at this point, as the case may be. But it's Plessy versus Ferguson, right? Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, that said it's okay to separate the races as long as you make it equal. And that was the Supreme Court rule. That was the federal law for all this time, for the past 50 years. And then we're going to finally have some people who are going to challenge this. So if we start with, where do you want to start? We'll start with Ada Lois-Sipple. So, and I'm going to bring up 2 cases because they're like literally right down the street from us. Ada Lois-Sipple, African American lady who wanted to go to law school at University of Oklahoma. That's right down the street, University of Oklahoma. And she was denied entry, not because of her grades. She had excellent grades. Not because she couldn't afford, because she could afford it. Not because she didn't have good essay writing skills, or she didn't have enough volunteer hours, or all this stuff that I'm telling you need to get. She had all of that. And she was denied because, she was an African American. And they literally told her that. So she said, Plessy versus Ferguson says, if you deny based on my race, then you have to make it separate but equal. So you need to have a law school that African Americans can go to. And they said, great, we're going to form a school, we'll call it Langston. And you can go to Langston Law School all by yourself. Right? She's going to sue. And then the University of Oklahoma, the Board of Regents, they're going to, the Supreme Court's going to tell the University of Oklahoma, look, we understand what you're doing here, and that was the law, and we get it, but to make it equal, think about how law schools work. If you were to walk into somebody's law office and they have a diploma on the board that says, on the wall that says Harvard Law or Yale Law, that they graduated from those 2 colleges, or they had a diploma on the wall that says Godebo Junior Votech Agricultural School Law, right? It's not equal. It's not equal. So she successfully argued that no, OU, you can't put me at Langston. You can't form your own law school just for me. I have to be allowed to go. And OU was forced by the Supreme Court to do that. That was 46, 47. Then in 48, we had George McLaren, and there's a picture of him. Famous picture. George has got his master's in education and wants to get his doctorate at the University of Oklahoma. But he's given the same spiel. You have good grades, you have enough credit hours, you have enough volunteer hours, you have good essay skills, you're a good person, you have the money, and you can't come because you're black. And they literally told him that. Well, he said, have you met my good friend Ada Lois-Sipple? And they're like, oh, dang it. All right, you can come in, but separate but equal. So George, here's what we're going to do. Have you heard me tell this story? They had him sit. They gave him his own table in the lunchroom. He could only sit at that table. They gave him his own carrel, his own desk in the library. That's where he could sit, in the library. In the classroom, they put him outside the door of the classroom so that he could still hear the professor talk. But the other white kids in the room wouldn't be so horrified by having a black kid in the room that they would lose focus on the material. They put him outside in the hall. He complained, by the way, said that wasn't fair, or that wasn't separate. It was separate, but it wasn't equal. And so they said, fine, we're going to move you inside the room, but we're going to put up this little wall. We're going to put up this little wall in the back of the room, and you're going to sit on one side of the wall. We're going to put the other members of the class on the other side, so that way they can't see you, but you can see the board. Are you kidding me? Supreme Court said, hey, you can't do that. So he was allowed to go ahead and move into the classroom. Sweat versus Painter, 1950, University of Texas. So here we've had law school, we've had School of Education, now we have the University of Texas, and Sweat versus Painter basically says, oh, okay, stop. All graduate classes, all graduate schools, no matter where you are, whether that's engineering, whether that's doctorate, being a doctor, whether that's getting your doctorate in education, whether that's law, whether that's whatever it is, no more segregation. Everybody can go into any program they want at the graduate level college. Okay, it's coming, it's coming. Let's jump to, before we get to Brown, let's jump to Rosa Parks. December 1955, right? So we know her story. In Montgomery, Alabama, the buses, Montgomery, Alabama at that time was 75% African American. The buses had a rule that basically said the first 4 seats in the bus were reserved for white people. If there were only African Americans on the bus, they could sit wherever they wanted, but if a white person were to get on the bus, then they got to sit in the front. Now, if there were more white people than there were the front 4 seats, then the white people would then fill up further and further back on the bus, and that if you were African American and you were in like seat number 5, but a white person got on and needed that seat, you'd have to get up and move back. A lot of these buses had little signs on a rope that said, this is where the colored, because that's what they said, this is where the colored people start, where you sit. And so you could take that sign, you could move it back and forth on the bus, depending on how many white people are on the bus. All right. Also, if you were an African American, if there were white people on the bus already and you got on the bus, then you'd go up the front steps and then you'd pay the driver, and then you'd get off the bus, go around to the back, and come in through the back, because they didn't want African Americans to walk through the non-colored area of the front of the bus. I am not making this up. And so this is what's going on. In about several years before this actually happened, Rosa Parks was doing this, and she had made a face at one of the driver, because she had gotten on the bus, she had paid, and then he said, you have to go around to the back of the bus. So she got off, and it was raining, and she got off, and she went, and she had made a face or something like that, and the bus driver just drove off, left her there in the rain. It's the same bus driver in December of 1955, and we know the story. The story says that she sat basically, and she didn't sit at the middle. She didn't sit at the front of the bus. She sat the first seat allowed for African Americans. The first seat allowed. So it wasn't in the first 4 seats, but the situation was that there were 4 African Americans who were sitting in those front, as far as they could come up, and then the white passengers, they filled up the seats that they had at the front, and then more white people came in, and so now Rosa Parks and the other 3 people were asked by the driver, hey, you got to get up and you got to move to the back of the bus. 3 of them did. 3 of them got up and they moved, because that was the rule. That was at the time. And Rosa Parks had decided that she had had enough. You know, the stories that say, well, she'd had a long day at work and she was tired. Well, her autobiography says, no, I wasn't physically tired. I was just tired, like sick and tired of the situation. And so she said the bus driver came up and said, "Hey, you got to move." And she's like, "No, I'm not going to move." And then he said, "Well, I'm going to call the cops." And she's like, "Do what you need to do." So the cops came and they arrested her. That was December 1st, I believe, December 1st of 1955. So she was arrested. December 4th, which was a Sunday, a whole bunch of African-American churches got together and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to boycott the buses tomorrow on December 5th. And so if you're African-American, then do not ride the buses. Well, 75% of Montgomery, Alabama at the time was African-American, so that's going to be a lot of empty bus seats, right? And so the next day, even though it was raining, and it was a terrible day anyway, African-Americans, they all boycotted the buses. Some of them rode in taxis. Some of them even walked to work like 20 miles. They walked because they weren't getting on the bus, and that was pretty effective for that one day. And then a group got together and said, well, this actually is pretty effective. And so oh my goodness, what do they call it? The MIA. Oh goodness, what do they call it? Anyway, a group got together. The African American churches got together. And they said, that was pretty effective, let's do it some more. And so there was this young preacher from the Dexter Hills Church, young, vibrant guy by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. He was a pastor, and they elected him basically as president of the MIA, which is the group that's going to boycott the bus. And they're going to boycott for 381 days, which is going to basically run the bus company into the ground when it comes to their finances. So that was the beginning. We call that the Montgomery bus boycott, and that was where Martin Luther King Jr. became Martin Luther King Jr. All based off Rosa Parks, all based off, okay. Go back to the school system. Harry Truman, in 1946, he had said, separate but equal, but not in the military. Let's stop this. We had the Buffalo Soldiers, in the Spanish-American War, and then we had the African-American only units in World War I, and really even in early World War II, just units made up only of African-Americans. But then a lot of the commanders, a lot of the chain of command, they said, what are we doing? This is stupid. Put a gun in somebody's hand. It doesn't matter what color they are. Just go shoot some Nazis, right? And so in 1946, Truman passed I don't have it up there, but he passed the rule in 1946 and 48 that said, look, the Army is now integrated. It doesn't matter what color you are. We're going to integrate the Army. All right. Brown versus Board of Education. Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. So this is a K-12 school, right? K-12 school system. And the argument had been going on for lots and lots of years that Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate, it's okay to separate the kids as long as it's equal. And we've talked about this. We know how this really works. You have the white school and you have the black school, and we know who gets the good uniforms. We know who gets the good band instruments. We know who gets the new textbooks. We know. And so it's very obvious. Well, several school districts around the country decided that they were going to sue and say, this is not fair, this is not fair, this is not fair. But ultimately, Thurgood Marshall, who is the lead lawyer, chose Topeka, Kansas to focus on, because Topeka, Kansas was really interesting in that the schools, the black school and the white school, actually were reasonably similar with regard to the dollar amounts that they were getting. And so he decided he wanted to use that school system as opposed to other school systems that were clearly out of line. He wanted to use the Topeka, Kansas school because they were similar, the black school and the white school. That way he could argue, look, it's not about money, it's about the color of the skin of the kid that we're having an issue with. And so they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, after some wheeling and dealing by Justice Earl Warren, the vote was 8-1, and then Justice Warren kind of did some, and then the vote was 9-0. And so 9-0 to say, okay, we are now going to say that you cannot have separate but equal schools, K-12 schools. You have to integrate. It was important for Chief Justice Earl Warren to get a 9-0 vote because Plessy versus Ferguson, remember, was 8-1. You had Justice Harlan who said the Constitution is colorblind, what's going on? And so it was 8-1 with Plessy versus Ferguson, the train case. And so Earl Warren wanted a 9-0, and he got it. Now, that was 1954 that case came out. The problem with Brown versus Board of Education quickly became apparent. The Supreme Court said in Brown versus Board of Education, they said, okay, we need to no longer separate the races in K-12 schools. Thank you, good night. That's basically what they said. And then they sent it out, and then all the people in the South who wanted to keep the black schools and the white schools separated said, oh, okay, yeah, we'll get around to it. So the Supreme Court in 1956 came up with Brown versus Board of Education Part 2, and they said, oh, you thought we were joking. We mean that you need to integrate the schools, quote unquote, with all deliberate speed, end quote, and which means you need to do that tomorrow. You need to integrate. So, a lot of southern states not very happy about that. In fact, what was it, 19 senators and 80 some odd congressmen, I mean, we're talking about federal, like the big Congress, right, signed the Declaration of Constitutional Principles, which said, we don't agree with the Supreme Court, and we are going to fight the Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education of integrating schools in any legal manner that we can. Good news, Oklahoma, our senators and our representatives, none of them signed that. So, all right. So let's get to the Little Rock Nine, yeah? Governor Fabus of Arkansas, I mean, he read the Supreme Court case. He knows what's going on. Little Rock School Board said, I have a date up there, 1957. Little Rock School Board says, next year, 1957, we are going to attempt to integrate the school system. We're going to open it up to not every black kid in the area, but a few, because we need to try it out, a trial basis. So we're going to open it up to a few. So they selected 9 kids to go to this high school, the Little Rock Nine. Well, Governor Fabus, not a fan of Brown versus Board of Education, he decided that no, this was not the proper time for these black kids to go to this white school, and so he sent out the National Guard. And the National Guard was told, these kids don't get in the building. You can't even make stuff up like this, right? The Arkansas governor told the National Guard to stop 9 black kids from getting in the building. Now, Eisenhower, interestingly enough, he didn't deal a lot with segregation issues, but the problem here is that Eisenhower, when he found out about this, Eisenhower saw this not as a desegregation issue, not as an integration or any of that. He saw this as a, wait. The Supreme Court ruled this, and the governor of this backwater state of Arkansas said, we're not going to do that? And then he's going to send troops and stop these kids from going to school? Eisenhower's like, mm-mm. So Eisenhower calls up the 101st Airborne. It's funny. He calls up the 101st Airborne Division, and he says, would you guys... This is the Army, right? Would you guys go to Little Rock and explain to the National Guardsmen that they're not going to be doing that. Eisenhower made a really interesting decision. He said that all the African Americans who were in the 101st Airborne Division should take a month off, basically. And so only the white soldiers from the 101 went down into Arkansas, and basically when they rolled in with, with their tanks and their M16s and the little National Guards, like, ooh, those are the big boys. Eisenhower then federalized the National Guard. And when you federalize the National Guard, the governor is no longer in charge of the National Guard, so then the president, who's now in charge of the National Guard, says, you're going to let those kids in. And the National Guard's like, yep, we're going to let those kids in. So those 9 kids got to go to school that year. Now, it was a rough year for those 9 kids. If you want to read some of their autobiographies, it's just awful. I mean, they were bullied every day, spat on and called all sorts of words. One girl talks about how she was surrounded in a stall on the toilet, and kids were lighting pieces of paper on fire and dropping it on top of her, and just crazy stuff. And it gets stranger. It gets stranger. You get to the end of the day. You get to the end of the year, and Governor Fabus says, "All right, new rule. I'm shutting down all of the 4 high schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a vote. And we're going to determine whether these schools should be public or private. If they become private schools, which then would be like a church school or a corporation, right? They are not under the guise of being a public school, which means that Brown versus Board of Education doesn't apply to them." Okay, that's true at that time. So he's trying to get out of it. And you know what? The people of Little Rock, Arkansas, they voted for him. They voted to make those schools private. Which means the black kids couldn't go to school there anymore. I'll be right back. Okay, everybody had the little break. We're all good? I know for you it wasn't anything, but all right. In 1957, the government's going to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1957. So in the South, we're having the issues with voting rights, right? Voting rights, right? Come on now. You know what? I'm going to start over. Okay, we're back. Everybody cooled down, cooled off? Excellent. Me too. In 1957, we're going to have the Civil Rights Act. Let's see, that'd be the first one since we had way back in Reconstruction times. And so this one is going to be focused, well, on a lot of things, but on voting issues down in the South. We've talked about how, it says you're allowed to vote, but based on poll taxes and crazy things and literacy laws. And we've talked about that before, but that's still going on. All that Jim Crow stuff is going on. So this act is going to be passed to try to get rid of that. An interesting anecdote about this particular bill. The senator from South Carolina, Strom Thurmond, he's going to try to filibuster this. So a filibuster, interesting, we're talking about that even today in 2021 with the $1.9 trillion CARES Act, the Act. A filibuster is where somebody's recognized by the chair and then you get up and you talk. But a filibuster is where you talk and 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 you talk. And the idea is that you talk so long that the time passes for you to be allowed to vote on the bill. Because the rule of a filibuster is once you start talking, as long as you keep going, they can't stop you. I know, right? So you're sitting here thinking, how long could Dr. Jones just talk? And the rule is you don't have to talk about anything specific. So with Strom Thurmond, he's going to get up, he's going to try to filibuster this bill. I mean, it's not successful, but he gets up and he starts reading the Constitution out loud, and he's reading the Declaration of Independence, and he's reading George Washington's speeches, and then he starts talking about whatever. You know, people in filibusters have like read out of the phone book. They've just read people's names on, just because they're playing a game up there. They're playing a game. It is important to note that this was the longest single person filibuster in history. He went for 24 hours and 18 minutes. 24 hours and 18 minutes he talked to try to stop this bill from going through. He was unsuccessful because 2 hours after he finally fell over, 2 hours later they passed the bill. I know you're sitting there thinking, so what if he had to go to the restroom? He did. Well, actually what he did was he dehydrated himself like 4 days before. He didn't drink anything, so that way he wouldn't have to go to the restroom. Although he did have to go like 3 hours into the speech, and so he called somebody else. He's like, hey, take my spot for like 10 minutes. So the guy comes, and there you go. And then apparently he had snacks while he was talking. Woo, crazy times, you know. That's not the craziest story about Strom Thurmond, but we're going to move on. Because I can tell this video is going to go long. Maybe we can break it up somewhere, I don't know. Now we just let it go. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, you may have heard of him. He's going to form the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. There's going to get 60 pastors together, 60 preachers. They're going to get together and they're going to say, okay, the boycott with the buses, that was pretty successful. How can we do more? What can we do in a non-violent way? What can we do? So, several students are going to pick up on this, and we're talking about college students. And we have the Greensboro 4 in North Carolina, February 1st, 1960. These 4 African American kids, college kids from, was it North Carolina University? That doesn't sound right. But anyway, North Carolina. They're going to come in. They're going to sit down at a counter, like at a lunch counter, kind of like that right there. Sit down at a lunch counter. Now, the problem here in Greensboro, North Carolina, at this particular store and this particular counter, it said whites only. So they sat down, and the cook refused to serve them. Well, here's the deal. They had planned this out, and so they just sat there. They didn't talk back, they didn't threaten anybody, and they had called the news ahead of time. They had one older white friend who was in on it, and so he had called the news. The news cameras were rolling in. Here come the television cameras, and they're just sitting. The 4 boys are just sitting there, being nice and quiet. They're not hurting anybody. And then here comes the police, and the police were like, "All right, guys, you got to go," and the kids are just sitting there. And the police can't arrest them because, one, they're not doing anything illegal, because it doesn't say they can't sit there. It just says they can't be served there. So they're just sitting there. And number 2, the television cameras, right? So Greensboro 4, this is going to start the great sit-in movement. And we're going to have like 13 different states or so. We're going to have hundreds, thousands of people who are going to join this movement as sitting in. So the idea is that you just walk in the door, you just sit down, and you don't cause any problems. You just sit there. And if the police want to escort you off, then you are escorted off. But you don't fight back. You just go limp, and then they pick you up, and you're just limp like a limp dummy, and they carry you and they throw you in the wagon and they arrest you. But you don't fight back. And that's the deal. And Martin Luther King Jr., he's going to push this. He's going to push this. Is this effective? Is it effective? Yeah, it's effective, because every time there's a sit-in in a president of a college's office, every time it's at a drugstore or a supermarket or a food place, there's going to be a television camera there. Oklahoma was not immune. Our champion, her name is Clara Luper. You probably learned about her in Oklahoma history. Clara Luper, there's a famous picture of her and a couple of her students. They went up to New York City in around this time, 1959, I think, went up to New York City, presented a play that she had written. She was a history teacher, by the way, and she had written a play about Martin Luther King Jr. and had learned about the sit-ins. And so she's like, you know what, we're going to start this in Oklahoma. So she started at Katz Drugstore, which is downtown Oklahoma City. And there you go. You see her sitting there. She's going to be ultimately arrested 26 times for these nonviolent protests. 26 times. She taught for 41 years, teaching history for 41 years. Oof. I'm halfway. All right, moving on. In April of 1960, Southern black students formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, so the SNCC. So this is going to be a national committee that's going to get these college kids riled up, and they're going to start doing the Freedom Riders and things like that. If you've ever seen the movie, and they're going to be the ones who are going to organize the protests in Washington D.C., where Martin Luther King Jr. is going to go, and he's going to say, "I have a dream." So we'll get to that later, but. This is all happening. It's just all kind of mushrooming and exploding all at the same time. So, yeah. All right. So Eisenhower, being a Republican, not a big fan of the huge welfare state that was the New Deal with FDR. Remember all that stuff, and trying to get people back to work. Not a big fan of all that kind of stuff, so he's trying to get rid of that stuff. Although, ironically, then he decides that he's going to have the national or the federal highway system built, right? Federal Highways Act of 1956. So you look right there. You look right there, somewhere in the middle, Oklahoma, and you get I-35, and you get I-40, and you get I-44, and we're all right there in Oklahoma City. So hey, it's like we would have a lot of trucks coming through. Oh, hey, we did have a lot of trucks. So. And the short version is, if it goes up and down, it ends with a 5, and if it goes left and right, it ends with a, or if it goes north and south, it ends with a 5, and if it goes left and right, east and west, it ends with a 0. So you have I-10, I-20, I-30, I-40, I-50, I-60, I-70, etc., and then you have Highway 5, Highway 15, Highway 25, Highway 35, I-35, Highway 4. And then if you break off into like a loop around the city, then you have like I-35, but then you have I-235 or I-40, I-240, and 240 is like a little spur that comes around but then reconnects, and that's how that works. And so you can always see how far you're away from the center of the city if you start counting the numbers ahead in front of it. So it's like, if you go down to Dallas and you're like, ooh, I'm on I-635. Well, that means that you're like 6 loops out from the center, right? Isn't that how that works? If that's not how that works, no, I'm going to say that's how that works, because there's like 435 and 535 and 6. Eisenhower, he really wanted to balance the budget. Unfortunately, he only balanced it twice. In 1959, he incurred the biggest peacetime deficit. And again, a deficit is how much you don't make in 1 year, and then you add up all the years together, you get the debt. In 1959, oh my goodness, the United States of America had a $12.5 billion deficit in 1 year. $12.5 billion. It's March 10th. Later today, or maybe tomorrow, they're going to pass a 1.9 trillion with a T trillion dollar bill, and that's not just that's on top of all the other stuff that 12.5 billion. That's cute. And interesting enough, that was 1959. 1960, we had he had a turnaround of $13.8 billion. So we actually made more money, like $1.1 billion, whatever it was, more. So it's just funny that we're even talking about billion. I mean, I'd like to be a billionaire, sure, but it's so funny. Moving on. Strategic Air Command, 1954. All right, so, man, those bad guys, the Soviet Union, they've got H-bombs, they've got A-bombs, they've got H-bombs, they're going to have the Tsar bomb. Oh, what are we going to do? Well, we need to get ready. And so, in 1946, So back up. In 1945, we had the 2 bombs. We dropped them on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that was all we had. And so then in 1946, we had gotten enough refined uranium and enough built-up plutonium to make 9 bombs. In 1946, we had 9 bombs and like 13 or 27 B. Oh, that's right. Not a lot of B-17, B-29s to drop the bombs. So John Foster Dulles is going to propose that we need to build up our stockpile of 1, planes, and 2, bombs. So we're going to call this the Strategic Air Command. So it's part of a 3-prong defense. Best defense is good offense, and so here's the argument. Here's the plan. Strategic Air Command. Part number 1, you have bombers that have nuclear weapons in them, and we have at least 1 or 2 of them flying at all times. And if they happen to be flying over there close to, you know, China or Soviet Union, it just happens to be that way. But at all times, we have somebody in the air with the power of dropping nuclear bombs on the bad guys. So that's part 1. Part 2, obviously, the ICBMs, the intercontinental ballistic missiles that we can shoot from a long way out and hit people. And then part 3, the Triton submarines that you can, you know, park yourself right off the coast of wherever. And so that was the 3 parts to our offense when it comes to the Cold War nuclear weapons. And again, Strategic Air Command. Also a popular video game back in the 1990s. Geneva Conference in 1955. So Stalin. Oh, Stalin. He's gonna die. And he's going to be replaced by Bulgarin. Sorry, Nikolai. And Eisenhower's going to meet him. It's like they're going to be best buddies forever. They're going to have little pinky, and they're going to exchange rings, and it's going to be great. No, they don't do any of that. In fact, they don't like each other at all. Good news, though, is that Bulgarin, he's going to be out pretty quickly, and Khrushchev comes. Oh no, that's bad news. Khrushchev is coming, people. That's the premier of the Soviet Union back when JFK was. We'll get to him. He's fun. Meanwhile, Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, remember he was kicked out of the Treaty of Paris, World War I, and so we made an enemy of him because we didn't allow him in the room, and then he went over there, and then he was like, communism seems pretty cool. And so then he's going to take over North Vietnam, and then we're going to get the Southern Vietnam. They're going to get involved in that. They're going to say, we don't want to do that, and so Vietnam's going to divide itself at the 17th parallel. Let's see, we have Ho Chi Minh in the north, and we have the Western government in the south, led by Ngo Dinh Diem. And I didn't even practice that. And so we're going to have the Vietnamese nationalists are going to ask for a national election, and ultimately the South's going to go, we're not going to do that because there's more communists, and so they're going to vote that way, and plus it's not fair that way anyway. And so I wonder what's going to happen with Vietnam in 15 years. All right, so let's see, and this review 1955. Let's see, West Germany, we're going to let them into NATO. Remember, we talked about that with the map last week. We had the blue countries versus the red countries. Let's see, the Warsaw Pact, that was the red countries, and the military union. Right, in May of 1955, the Soviets are going to end their occupation of Austria, and then we have Hungary. Hungary's going to rise up, and they're going to say, USA, please help. And for whatever reason, we didn't give them any money. I mean, there's reasons, but they asked for our help. The people of Hungary and the United States said, no, thank you. And the Soviets were like, sweet. So they came in and they took over Hungary. And see what happens. America's neutral. Oh well, look at that. What are we going to do about it? Well, see, this is a problem, and we actually run into this problem in the 1950s and 60s. How, if the Soviet Union's like flicks our ear, and they're like, what are you gonna do about it? Drop a bomb? Yeah, see, somebody flicks your ear, is that worthy of a nuclear bomb? I mean, maybe, but so our weapons were too powerful. That's a weird argument, isn't it? Our weapons were too powerful to fight. In 1953, we're going to make a bid for Iranian oil, and we're going to depose the guy in charge, and the Americans are going to put in, using the CIA coup, we're going to put in this guy, we're going to call him the Shah, because that sounds cool. The Shah of Iran, and he's going to be in charge for a couple of years, and he's going to give us really cheap oil. Meanwhile, over in Egypt, we're seeing America. We're involved in everything. So we have Nasser over there, the president of Egypt, and he's going to want to build the Suez Canal. We talked about this in world history. The Suez Canal. And so that's going to cost some money, right, because the Panama Canal. But this is a different kind, because the Panama Canal used dynamite and blowing through and the lock system. Whereas the Suez Canal is just a ditch. I mean, like literally, it's just a ditch, and it goes all the way from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. We had a question about that. Why did Napoleon think it was higher on one side than the other? And you all were like, remember that? It was a good day. But the United States said, Egypt asked for money, and they asked for money from the United States, and they asked for money from the Soviets. And when the United States found out the Soviets were being asked for money, the United States said, we're not paying. If the Soviets are going to pay, we're not going to pay. And then that irritated Nasser, so then he cut off the West, and the British and the French, who thought that they owned, because they paid for some of it, and they thought they owned it, and then Nasser cut them off, and then the British and French were going to declare war on Egypt, and they were like, hey, United States, you're going to help us out, and the United States is like, not so much. And then it all kind of... So then Eisenhower decided to come up with the Eisenhower Doctrine. Remember, the Truman Doctrine was, we're going to stop communism wherever it starts. The Eisenhower Doctrine was, we're going to stop communism in the Middle East. So we're not going to let the Soviet Union in the Middle East. The oil-producing exporting countries, OPEC, started in 1960. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, and Venezuela. So think about where they are, right? Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, Iraq. They're all in one little area of the world. And then Venezuela. That's way over on our side. They're going to form a group. There's 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6. Anyway, the 5 here, they're going to form a group called OPEC, the oil-producing exporting countries, and they are going to decide that they have a lot of oil, and they are going to then get together and determine the price of oil for the world. Ultimately, if we jump ahead to the year 2021, there's 13 countries involved in OPEC, which in the year 2021 they own like 44%. They produce 44% of the world's oil. These 13 countries, and by the way, the United States is not one of them. 44% of the world's oil they produce, but more importantly for the OPEC countries, they have like 81% of all the oil, possible oil reserves in the world that's been found, and so they control the price. They control the price, or they can control the price. If we jump way ahead, President Trump was trying to get us off OPEC oil and just use United States oil. The United States has plenty of oil. The problem is that if we start using our oil, then when we run out of our oil, then we definitely have to pay their prices. Trump didn't want to pay those prices. Biden is more likely to pay those prices and keep our oil. It's a pretty crazy mess. But hey, but interesting enough, OPEC, they took some losses this past year, right? COVID. The second quarter of 2020, not good for them. It was one of the lowest levels of income for OPEC countries for like 30 years. And that's all I have to say about that. President Eisenhower is going to be elected again in 1956. October 4th, October 4th, 1957. The Soviets are going to have, they're going to send up Sputnik 1, and it's about that big, like a big beach ball, a giant metal sphere. They're going to put it up. It's going to go around the world a couple times, and it's going to go beep, beep, beep. That's all it does. That's all it does. But here's the deal. The United States, we did not have the capability of putting something up that high and make it go around the world. We didn't have that capability. So the Russians, they put that up. And what was crazy about it at that time is that in the headlines they're like, hey, you can tune into your radio on this signal, and you can listen to the Russian satellite, the communist satellite coming over, and you can actually see it if it's a clear night, a little streak in the sky. And people are like, whoa, they could drop bombs on us, and there's nothing we can do about it because we can't shoot it down because it's too high. Why are they able to do that? In fact, just a year later, right? In November, just 1 month later, they sent a dog up in space. Oh, Latka. There's Latka. Oh, yeah, good times. So sent a dog up in space just to see if they could. Good news for all you dog lovers. Good news. The dog made it up into space. You know, they probably shaved him, put little electrodes all over his head, and hardened. Can you imagine? Anyway, so good news, he got up to space, and yay, he was the first mammal in space, because you can't really say the first animal, because you're thinking about all the bacteria animals, they're wrong. But anyway, the first big animal in space, yay for Latka. For you for you big animal lovers out there, don't ask what happened to the dog, because they didn't really have a plan of getting him down, so. That's okay. The United States. Who are we going to send up first? We're going to send up a monkey before we send up people. That's coming later. Ham, the monkey, the chimpanzee. Okay, so in response, President Eisenhower, he's going to say, whoa, the Soviets, you can't do that, because, you can do that, we can't do that, we need to be able to do that. So he's going to form the National Air and Space National Aeronautics and Space Administration. We call that NASA for short. You may have heard of it, NASA. And there you go. And then we're going to be off and running. The technological advances the Soviet Union are making, people are like, whoa, so is communism better than us? They're putting stuff up in space, and we can't even shoot it down. It's crazy. So is communism better? And of course, Eisenhower's like, no, capitalism is better. Communism is awful. So, we need to have better education. So in 1958, the National Defense and Education Act, the NDEA, is going to send out almost $1 billion, which back then was a lot of money, to increase our scores in math and science and foreign languages. How's that working for y'all? I laugh. Okay. Environmental concerns. Due to environmental concerns, the Soviet Union and the United States agree to stop blowing up small islands in the Pacific. So in March and October 1958, they're done with their testing. Now we're going to have nuclear weapons go off? Yes, because other countries are going to get into the mix, and they're going to have their little things, but that's later. That's later. In July of 58, Lebanon asks for help from the United States, and they're like, hey, remember the Eisenhower Doctrine, because the Eisenhower Doctrine says communism stops in the Middle East, so help us out. In 1959, Soviet dictator Khrushchev, he's fun. Khrushchev is going to go to the United Nations, and he's going to make a big speech about how great communism is and how awful capitalism is. Is that the one where he takes off his shoe and he bangs on the he bangs on the podium with his shoe to get people to shut up? You should look that up. The Khrushchev shoe speech. In 1960, oops, I'm not saying the America's perfect, right? I mean, right? In 1960, we had Gary Powers was flying over the Soviet Union in the U-2 spy plane. There you go, and he got captured. He was shot down. He was captured. He was put in Soviet jail for 10 years. Eisenhower called Khrushchev and said, okay, come on, man. 10 years is a long time. And Khrushchev's like, you were taking pictures of us. He's a spy in this spy plane. We caught you red-handed. Eisenhower's like, yeah, but 10 years, come on, man. But here's the deal. We capture their spies and they capture our spies, and sometimes we just have an exchange of spies, and it's like, okay, you get yours back and we'll get ours back. It's kind of a weird little situation. Join the CIA. We talked about that. When did we talk about that? Oh, we did that on Zoom a couple weeks ago. The newspaper over here says Powers gets a 10-year sentence. Oh, I just said that. But the one on the headline on the far left is really interesting to me. It says space capsule. Use your words. Space capsule is caught in mid-air by U.S. plane on re-entry from orbit. So a space capsule is coming in from orbit, and a plane catches it? That's what it says, right? Well, I gotta YouTube that. All right. Meanwhile, back here in the North America, Latin America. Remember the last time we talked about Latin America? Let's see. We had Teddy Roosevelt, who said, "Hey, no, let's back up further. We have Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine says nobody messes with Latin America. Europe, stay away." Teddy Roosevelt's corollary says nobody messes with Latin America, well, except for us. Then we had FDR and the good neighbor policy. Okay, let's all kind of be friends. We're still going to, but we're going to be friends. And now Eisenhower's going to get back involved. Let's see. Latin America not very happy about it because we are involved. The CIA coup in 1954 with the government of Guatemala. We got this guy named Fidel Castro. He's going to be important here in 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 slides. Fidel Castro led a coup that overthrew the American-supported government of Cuba in 1959. He's not a big fan of America, and so if you're not a big fan of America, who do you go to for money and stuff? You go to the Soviet Union. So Castro's going to become communist. He's going to become buddy-buddy with Khrushchev. And here's the problem with that. Cuba is located 90 miles south of Florida. Oops! Hey, guess what is within range, or what can be shot from Cuba into a whole bunch of cities if it's only 90 miles away? It starts with an I and rhymes with ICBM, Russian. Oof. That's going to be bad. That's going to be bad. In 1960, Congress authorized $500 million to prevent communists coming to Latin America. So we're going to try to stop them in Nicaragua. We're going to try to stop them in Panama. We'll get there. A guy by the name of Ollie North. It's going to be fun. And then we had 50. So we had 48 states all the way up to here, and now we're going to have 50. So we have Alaska. Alaska and Hawaii became states in 1959. So if your grandparents, there's a chance your grandparents are older than Alaska and Hawaii as states. Alaska was first, 64-20 vote. 20 people did not want Alaska to be a state. 64-20 vote makes Alaska. Whoa. 64-20. 64 and 20 is 84. There were only, there's 96 votes because we didn't have 2 states. 96 votes. So there were 12 people who didn't even vote. 64 people liked Alaska. 20 people didn't like Alaska, and 12 people apparently didn't even care. Hawaii. Kennedy and Nixon. I'll be right back. In 1960, we're going to have our next election. Oh, remember the curse of Tippecanoe? Oh, we know how this is going to turn out. In 1960, we have Richard Nixon is going to be the Republican candidate versus Senator John F. Kennedy, who is a Democrat who's going to win. They're going to have a, what am I trying to say about this? Kennedy, a lot of people were thinking, well, we can't have Kennedy as president because he's Catholic. And I'm just sitting here thinking, so what? No, for some people that was a big deal because their argument was, if we have a Catholic president, who do Catholics, look up to and follow? And then the answer would be the Pope. And so the argument was, our country isn't going to be run by an American president. Our country is going to be run by an Italian Pope who's telling the American president what to do. So there were some detractors of Kennedy simply because of his faith. Let's see. Kennedy argued that, hey, during Eisenhower's administration, look what the Soviets did. They put a dog up in space, and they've done all this stuff, and look what we've done. We haven't put a dog up in space. So we need to get down the road. And that forced Vice President Nixon to argue, well, no, we're getting there. And see, that's not a good argument, right? This was the first time that we're going to have a debate on TV. And, I mean, look at Kennedy. I mean, he's like a movie star. I mean, with the teeth and the perfect hair and the strong jaw. He's like a movie star. And his wife, Jackie Onassis Kennedy, I mean, she's beautiful. I mean, it's just the perfect couple. And you got Nixon over here. Who, I mean, yeah, he's got some bearing. But the problem is that, and he talked about this in his autobiography, he likes to sweat. He doesn't like to sweat, but he's a sweater. He sweats a lot. Yeah, sure. He sweats a lot, and so he has his handkerchief. You can see him there, and he would every time he would speak, right before he would speak, he would dab his lip because he gets sweat on his face when he's talking. And a couple of times the camera would pan over while he's doing this, while Kennedy is talking and Nixon, and so that looks like he's nervous. That looks like he doesn't know what he's doing. That looks like he's the lesser guy. And then the other thing is that Nixon, manly man, his beard would grow very fast, and so by the time the TV show started, he had a 5 o'clock shadow, which kind of looked a little like. And this guy didn't even shave. Are you kidding me? He's on TV for Brett. He didn't even shave, right? So it's interesting that the people who listened to the debate on radio said, "Oh yeah, Nixon was way better than Kennedy in the debate." But people who watched the TV, they were like, "Wow, the movie star crushed the other guy." There he is, JFK. Number 35. Look, we're getting close. President Kennedy is the youngest president to be elected. Now, he's not the youngest president to serve. Remember that was Teddy Roosevelt after McKinley died. But so Kennedy's 44 when he's elected. Yeah, is that right? 44. So he and his wife move in, and they've got the little kid, and we've got they call it Camelot. The White House is going to be called Camelot, based off King Arthur and Queen Guinevere, and it's a storybook romance, and it's all wonderful and perfect, and yay! Do you know what's coming? He's going to hire his brother as Attorney General, and who's going to clamp down on the FBI and change things up. Let's see, JFK. I mean, it's President Kennedy, right? John Fitzgerald Kennedy, but everybody calls him JFK. And then his buddy, his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, we're going to call him LBJ. But JFK served at the height of the Cold War, and he was basically anti-Soviet Union all the time. That's pretty much what his job was. Let's see. He did some other stuff. Kennedy also proposed a multi-billion-dollar plan to land an American on the moon. In fact, was that 1961? He said, we're going to put a man on the moon, and I challenge NASA to do it before the end of the decade. I mean, we haven't even put a man up in space yet. I mean, it's crazy. Well, we had at that point, but we put a man on the moon, and he actually ended. He said, and bring him home safely. No way we were going to be able to do that. Oh, yes, we did. July 20th. 1969. So we didn't beat it by much, but there you go. So we've had the New Deal, the Square Deal, all the different deals we've had, and here's a new frontier. This is JFK's plan. New frontier. We're going to basically stop inflation. I mean, that's pretty much it. We're going to stop inflation. So inflation's where prices go up. We put more money out there. We send more dollar bills out in the public, which means now there's more money out there, so prices can go up further. So we make more money out there, and then That's inflation. And so JFK says, no, we're going to stifle inflation. Let's see. And keep wages higher for workers, and this is going to inspire patriotism, right? So one of his famous quotes here is, "Oh, I was about to do a Kennedy accent. Oh, I'm going to do it anyway. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." That actually was not bad. I just want you to know that. That was pretty good. Imitation of Kennedy. Kennedy proposed the Peace Corps. So we talked about the GI Bill last week. So the Peace Corps, that's another option for you if you're thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do after high school. I don't know what I'm going to do, when I turn 20. Peace Corps. Go abroad. Go get your volunteer hours. But when I say volunteer hours, I'm like these are like real volunteer hours. Like you're going to go to Uganda and dig wells, clean water, that kind of stuff. One of my friends from high school back in the 80s, she went to Russia for a Peace Corps trip and spent 3 months over there in Russia. So cool stuff. She's now the director of international students at UCL. And in fact, we've already talked about her. She's the one who was Guatemala when I was Belize, and we did the okay. Southern Democrats and Republicans despised the president's new frontier plan. They didn't like him because he was going to try to stop inflation. And there are some people who like inflation, like people who can raise the prices. And there you go. In 1962, Kennedy's going to get involved in an issue with the steel industry. The steel industry is going to try to raise prices. Kennedy's going to be like, stop, and then they're going to lower them. So hey, he did some good stuff there. We stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of the 1960s, a frontier of unknown opportunities and perils, a frontier of unfulfilled hopes and threats. The new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises, it is a set of challenges. That was maybe a little too Irish. No, I don't know. It was pretty Irish. New York is going to become the capital of the world when it comes to artwork. Look at that. Jackson Pollock's, what is that, number 17A? That's right. Those of you who have students class, I just correctly named that one, 17A. It sold in 2018 for $200 million. And yes, I know you're like, so he just splattered paint on a canvas and sold it. Jackson Pollock's 1940. Abstract, yeah, it's abstract art, right? What does it mean to you? Ernest Hemingway is going to write The Old Man and the Sea. John Steinbeck's going to write, The Pony and and Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men. Oh, yeah, it's right up there. I just look at the slide. And then we have Joseph Heller is going to write Catch-22. We've already talked about Catch-22. What is a Catch-22? There you go. And that was written about World War I. All right. We already talked about the Berlin Wall. That's the same picture, except in reverse, right? It wasn't the last time we saw that last time. It was the other way. Western Europe. Okay, so Western Europe. Remember last time we talked about that? We were giving them the Marshall Plan, dollars, to irritate Stalin, and it pulled them out, pulled them up by the bootstraps, and everything's going good and everything's going great. So they're going to form the Western Europe countries. They're going to form the the EEC, the European Economic Community, which is kind of like, you say, the United States, which is Florida, Florida and Texas and Colorado and Oklahoma are the United States, and we're taking all of our economies and we're working together as a group of United States to then make decisions. Well, the EEC is a group of United States, capital S, of France and Denmark and UK and Germany, West Germany, and Italy, and et cetera, to work together to then compete against the United States, lowercase s, of America. And Kennedy's going to bargain with them, and they're going to lower and raise tariffs, and they're going to lower tariffs, and we're going to have some great trade relationships with those countries. Yay! Okay. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara is going to say, hey, there's a lot of hot spots around the world. So here's what we're going to do. We need to have a flexible response. It's a very simple idea. We're going to take American troops and we're going to put them around the world, like in random places. So Kind of like, when we, the Lend-Lease program with UK during World War II, and we said, hey, we will give you these 50 old World War I destroyers if you give us 8 military bases, right? And so those military bases are located like in really weird places, Tuvalu and Kiribati, and I'm making words up now. One of those are real words, but they're all around the world. And so now we're going to have military bases around the world, and we're going to put troops in there, so that if there's a flare-up in some random spot in the world, America can get there quickly. And you say to yourself, makes sense? But the downside of that is, if you have troops all over the world and there's a flare-up, that means we have troops right there, which means we have troops right there. And things can get out of control if we don't want to, pull the trigger. If you don't have troops right there and you have to be like, oh man, we got a flare up in East Timor, where's the closest place? And it's 5,000 miles away. It's going to take us a while to get there. At least people have a chance to think about it en route, right? But if we have troops all over the world and it only takes them 2 hours to get anywhere in the world, you hotheads, got to be careful, so for example, Vietnam. 1961, we're going to do the Alliance for Progress. So this is the Marshall Plan for Latin America. Marshall Plan is Western Europe. Alliance for Progress, Latin America. So we're going to give a whole bunch of money to Latin America, and the idea is that, here are some steps here. Let's see. Increase everybody's wages, per capita income by 2.5%. So if you made $1,000, next year you're going to make $1,025. It's a raise, right? Establishment of democratic governments. That's probably number one. Establishment of democratic governments, because why are we actually giving them money? So that they're not communist. The elimination of adult illiteracy by 1970. By 1970, everybody can read. Wouldn't that be great? Oh, so great. Price stability, no inflation or deflation, more equitable income distribution, land reform, economic social planning. That all sounds wonderful. And so what do? You say, hey, Venezuela, here's $100 million to fix your country. Guess where that $100 million goes? Not to the people. Hey, Paraguay, here's $50 million. I'm going to give it to the president of Paraguay, and then you distribute as you see necessary. Where do you think that goes? Not to the people. I guess we can name the other 17 countries, but it's not all roses when it comes to military action. We didn't win everything. So let's talk about the Bay of Pigs. All right, so Batista is out, Castro is in. We have a lot of freedom fighters, Cuban freedom fighters who are in Miami, in Florida. And they're like, no, we don't like Castro, so we are going to personally go down there and remove him, probably violently, remove him from his office. And USA, you're going to help us out, right? Now, these are Cuban exiles. And the CIA, because it's outside the borders, right? The CIA says, yeah, we're going to help you. We're going to hook you up. And so they took the Cuban exiles, they went down to Guatemala, and they trained them of how to be And then a couple of days before the invasion, we had some B-29s that probably didn't have the American flag painted on their tail. Some B-29s come in and soften the ground with some bombs a couple of days before, and then these guys, they came in under cover of darkness. These Cuban exiles. When they got there, they ran into some logistical problems, and it kind of slowed them down a little bit at the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. The Bay of Pigs, okay, right there. They ran into some logistical problems, and then some things that they didn't expect, which slowed them down. When the light came up, here comes the sun. Suddenly it was on the news, and then suddenly it was on the news, and then suddenly it was on the world news. And then the Cubans, the exiles, they're calling on their big old, they're like, hey, USA, you're supposed to give us air support. You're supposed to fly in the bombers, like right now. And President JFK said, well, this is awkward because now we're on international TV, and if we fly in bombers, well, this is awkward. So the CIA said, we don't know who y'all are, and walked away. And so these guys were captured and they were interrogated, and of course they ratted us out. And Castro was like, see, United States, you are very bad men. So it was an incredible embarrassment for JFK, for his CIA-led Cuban exiles to get caught. I mean, it's just embarrassing. Which then leads to this, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So Cuba says, hey, Soviet Union, you see what the USA is doing? They're like 90 miles north. They're coming down here. They're trying to kill me. So Soviet Union, here's what I like from you. Since we're all on the same communist page, here's what we're going to do. You're going to send me some nuclear weapons. We're going to put them in silos here in Cuba, and then we're going to announce it to everybody. And then the United States is not going to mess with us because we have weapons. That's the plan. Well, the Cubans, the Soviet engineers come to Cuba and they start digging the holes for the silos. And for like 4 or 5 months, the United States, President Kennedy was basically told, nah, they're not really going to do. I mean, they're not really going to do that, right? Well, then a U-2 spy plane, kind of like the one that Gary Powers shot down in, a U-2 spy plane flies over Cuba, way up there, takes some nice pictures, and says, look, they've got stuff. And so Kennedy calls out the troops and calls out the Navy. The Navy goes over, and the Navy's going to blockade Cuba because the Soviets are going to bring nuclear weapons in to fill up the holes. And so we're going to send a fleet out to stop the Soviet fleet coming in. And everybody knew what was going on. So for 4 days, all the citizens of the United States were glued to their television sets going, what's going to happen when the Soviet fleet gets there? I mean, are there going to be shots fired? Because if there's going to be shots fired, there's like nuclear weapons on some of those boats. And if we have shots fired there, then there's going to be all crazy stuff. So we look back at it, and history says that was probably the closest we ever got up to this point to World War III. Probably the closest we ever got. The short version is the Soviet boats got close, they got closer, and then Khrushchev, JFK called Khrushchev's bluff, and Khrushchev said, I don't need this headache. And he turned his ships around, and he left. Now, the public reason for him turning around, Khrushchev said, look, we'll turn around and we won't put nuclear weapons on Cuba if you promise, JFK, to leave Cuba alone. So JFK is like, all right, we'll leave Cuba alone. Now, there's a secret deal that Khrushchev says, hey, we will promise to take our nuclear weapons away from Cuba if you take your nuclear weapons out of Turkey. And of course JFK is like, well, we don't have nuclear weapons in Turkey. And Khrushchev's like, dude, we know you have nuclear weapons in Turkey, which is just like this far from Russia. So you need to get rid of nuclear weapons. We also knew you had nuclear weapons in Italy. And so JFK is like, all right. So they were called the Jupiter nuclear weapon, Jupiter ballistic missiles. So we took all our Jupiter ballistic missiles out of Turkey. I'm sure we did. And then, hey, the whole thing's diffused and everybody wins and everybody relaxes. And we go back to DEFCON 4. DEFCON 5 DEFCON 1 is that right? DEFCON 1 is the highest level. DEFCON 5 is the peace. So we go back to DEFCON. Or is it reversed? Because I remember thinking it was 5 would be bad, but I think it was actually the opposite, which made me go, what? That's weird. So we'll just call it DEFCON 3, right? Because then that way it's the same either way. Oh, look, we're still struggling with civil rights here. JFK is going to he's going to try to get the black vote, and he's going to try he's going to push he's going to tell people he's going to push for civil rights legislation. Never really kind of materializes. Now, part of that's not his fault because he's about to get axed. But in the 1960s, we had the Freedom Riders. They're the ones who are going to get on the buses, and they're going to try to go across the state lines. Remember, Interstate Commerce Clause? And there you go. So that's what happens. And then we had the Voter Education Project to try to get the southern states to please franchise the blacks to allow them to vote. In the spring of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr., you may have heard of him, he's going to launch a campaign in Birmingham, Alabama. Again, nonviolent protesting. Going to sit down in the streets, etc., etc. And the Birmingham, Alabama authorities are going to decide that they're going to be aggressive. And so you see the pictures of the guard dog. You see the pictures of the water hose responses. And Martin Luther King Jr. is going to be arrested. He's going to be sitting in a jail. He's going to write a very interesting series of essays called Letters in a Birmingham Jail. Letters in a Birmingham Jail. I think we're going to read a couple of those. Let's see. In shock, President Kennedy delivers a speech on June 11th of 1963 where he says, "Stop! Stop doing this! Stop!" Right. The last slide of this marathon video. So Kennedy was telling him to stop. And then he was down in Dallas for a convention, the Democratic National Convention. And on his way from point A to point B, he comes around the corner in his nice open limo. You see there, he's sitting there in the top picture. He's sitting there smiling. His wife Jackie in her nice pink dress in an open convertible. And we know that they come around the corner. What's the name of that street? Ooh, you'd think I'd know that off the top of my head. He comes around the corner on that street, and then he gets halfway down, and the shot rings out from the book depository located not too terribly far away. We have Lee Harvey Oswald, who's up on the... I should have looked all this stuff up. But was the 6th floor, the 7th floor, or the 3rd floor, or the 4th floor? It's one of the floors, and he shoots him from behind and hits him. And Kennedy's hit in the head. So this is the picture just after the shot. Kennedy is slumped over. Jackie is reaching back to grab one of the Secret Service guys, and they're going to speed off and go to the hospital where they're going to attempt to save Kennedy's life, but it's to no avail. They're finding pieces of Kennedy's head and or his brain on her coat. So there you go. Lee Harvey Oswald is going to be captured, and then interestingly enough, he's going to be captured, and then on one of his being transferred from point A to point B as a criminal, he's going to be shot and killed himself. So the assassin is assassinated by a guy by the name of Jack Ruby, and conspiracy theories everywhere. Now this particular assassination, you can see it online. I know it's weird for me to even say that, right? But a guy by the name of Zapruder, he had his little 8mm camera, and he's filming. Oh, look, it's the president and his wife, and they're coming right down the street. And that actually picture is from that. And so, and you can watch the what's 38 seconds or something like that, and you watch the car come in. Then you can just see and you see it speed off and all that kind of stuff. So it's called the Zapruder film. Now, taken from the Zapruder film, then of course it shows all the people there on the hill, the grassy knoll, and so people, all the conspiracy theories of, well, who's the lady who looks like she's a Russian because she's wearing the Russian thing, and who is she, and we never did find her, and wait, if the bullet hit him like this, then why does his head go this way, and maybe there were two shooters and they shot at the same time, but where's the second bullet? Doesn't matter. He died. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson is sworn in, and so here's there's the famous picture of LBJ standing next to Kennedy's wife, Jackie, and he's being sworn in as president right there on Air Force One. And we'll get to LBJ next week, or next video, right? You know what I'm saying. The last line there says, Kennedy was praised more for his ideals than what he had actually achieved. Kennedy, if you ask the Democrats, where does Kennedy rank? And he's usually in the top 10 or so, because, JF Kennedy's the movie star. But what did he actually do? I mean, you can argue he did some stuff, but it was more about his ideas that he wanted to do, but he didn't get around to doing them for obvious reasons. Now, LBJ, he's going to take the Kennedy football, and he's going to run with it. And we'll see how well he does with that next time. Although there's something called Vietnam that's going to get in the way. But we'll get there. All right, everybody. Whew, I know this one was long, but it is what it is. This is the reason we're not doing double chapters anymore. I'll see you on the flip side, and or Zoom. Be good.